Welcome to Silent Screams, where darkness, whispers, and terror await you. Are you ready to confront your fears? Story 1: The Phantom of the Ebon Tide. The storm churned violently, waves towering like liquid monoliths as the trawler, Sea Whisper, battled the unrelenting fury of the Atlantic. Captain Elias Marlowe clutched the helm, his knuckles white against the worn oak wheel. Around him, the cries of his crew were drowned by the howling wind. A distress call crackled over the radio, static-laden and haunting. "This is the Ebon Tide. Coordinates." The voice faded, replaced by a chilling whisper. "Turn back." Elias felt a shiver crawl up his spine. The Ebon Tide was a ship thought to have vanished over 60 years ago, swallowed by the sea during its maiden voyage. Sailors spoke of its ghostly silhouette appearing on the horizon during violent storms, a harbinger of doom. The first mate, Aaron, staggered into the cabin. "Captain, there's something out there." Port side. Through the torrential rain, a faint light pulsed in the distance. A beacon? No, it flickered unnaturally, as if alive. Against his better judgment, Elias turned the wheel, steering toward the eerie glow. As the Sea Whisper drew closer, the silhouette of a massive ship emerged. Its hull was cloaked in seaweed and barnacles, yet its towering masts stood defiant against the gale. The name on its bow was unmistakable: Ebon Tide. The storm subsided as they approached, an unnatural calm settling over the sea. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, their breath visible in the sudden chill. Elias made the decision. "We're boarding her. Aaron, lead the way." The boarding party climbed the corroded ladder that dangled from the Ebon Tide. The deck was a graveyard of debris, broken crates, rusted tools, and torn sails. A suffocating silence hung in the air, broken only by the creak of the ship's ancient timbers. "This place feels wrong," muttered Jonah, the youngest crew member. Aaron picked up a logbook, its cover warped by time and salt. As he flipped through the pages, his face paled. "Captain, listen to this. October 14, 1863, the sea grows restless. The crew reports whispers below deck, though no man dares venture into the hold. October 18th, the whispers are louder. I see figures in the mist. This ship is cursed." A sudden, piercing wail erupted from below, freezing the men in place. Jonah dropped his lantern, the flame extinguishing with a hiss. "What was that?" "Stay together," Elias ordered. But his words faltered as shadows began to writhe around them, coalescing into humanoid forms. Their eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and their mouths moved in silent screams, driven by a mix of terror and curiosity. The group descended into the bowels of the Ebon Tide. The air grew colder with each step, their breaths clouding before them. The hold was a cavernous expanse, lined with rotting barrels and crates. In the center of the room stood a massive iron chest, its surface etched with strange, pulsating symbols. Jonah, against the warnings of his crewmates, approached it. "Don't," Aaron hissed. But Jonah's hand was already on the lid. The chest opened with a groan, releasing a burst of freezing air. Inside lay a single object, a tarnished pocket watch. The moment Jonah touched it, the ship shuddered violently. From the shadows emerged figures, spectral and menacing, their translucent forms revealing skeletal remains beneath tattered uniforms. One of them stepped forward, A captain's hat perched atop his decayed skull. His voice was a guttural rasp. "Who dares disturb the ebon tide?" Elias stepped forward. "We mean no harm. We answered your distress call." The specter's hollow eyes glowed brighter. "You have sealed your fate. The watch binds you to this ship. Eternity awaits." The crew's screams echoed as the spirits closed in. Jonah clutched the pocket watch, his eyes wide with terror. "I didn't mean to." "It's too late," the ghostly captain growled. "Your souls are ours." Elias grabbed Jonah, yanking him toward the ladder. "We need to get off this ship. Now." The ebon tide came alive, its timbers groaning and shifting to block their escape. The spirits pursued relentlessly, their ethereal forms passing through walls and obstacles. One by one, the crew fell, dragged into the darkness by spectral hands. Only Elias and Jonah made it back to the Sea Whisper. As they cut the lines and powered the engine, the ebon tide began to sink, dragged into the depths by an unseen force. But as it vanished beneath the waves, the pocket watch glowed ominously in Jonah's hand. "Throw it away," Elias shouted. Jonah hesitated, then hurled the watch into the sea. The glow faded, and the ocean grew calm once more. But as they sailed away, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Months later, the Sea Whisper was found adrift, its crew missing. On the captain's desk lay a single object, a tarnished pocket watch, ticking steadily. Story 2: The Phantom of the Ironclad. The sea was calm, unnaturally so. As the freighter Persephone cut through the moonlit waves, Captain Elias Kane, a seasoned sailor with over 3 decades of experience, leaned against the bridge's railing, scanning the horizon. The North Atlantic was infamous for its temperamental weather. Yet tonight, the silence felt heavy, oppressive. "It's too quiet," muttered First Mate Colin Harper, standing nearby. Kane nodded. "A storm brewing? Perhaps. Or something worse." The Persephone was en route to Iceland, carrying industrial supplies. But what was supposed to be a routine voyage took a sinister turn when a dense fog rolled in from nowhere. It swallowed the ship whole. And within moments, the radar went haywire. The crew scrambled as static crackled through the comms. "Captain, there's something dead ahead," shouted Harper. Through the murky veil, a shadow emerged, a massive ironclad warship, its hull rusted and barnacle-encrusted. It loomed like a ghost from another era. On its side, barely legible through decades of decay, was the name, Ravager. The Persephone barely avoided a collision, but the encounter left the crew shaken. Against his better judgment, Captain Kane decided to investigate. A boarding party was assembled, and with lanterns in hand, they approached the derelict vessel in a lifeboat. The Ravager was an ironclad from the late 19th century, an era long past. Its deck was slick with algae, and the air reeked of brine and decay. The silence was deafening, broken only by the creak of metal as the ships shifted against the waves. "Stay together," Kane ordered, his voice firm despite the unease gnawing at his gut. They ventured deeper, finding evidence of a crew long gone. Plates of food sat on tables, moldy but untouched. Hammocks still swung faintly in the non-existent breeze. Yet, there were no bodies. "Where'd they all go?" muttered crewman Riggs, his flashlight sweeping the shadows. Then they heard it, faint whispers, carried by the fog. The voices seemed to come from all around. growing louder and more insistent. One by one, the lanterns flickered and died. Back to the lifeboat. Now, Kane barked. But the path they came from was gone, replaced by an endless maze of corridors. The whispers turned to screams. The crew's panic was palpable as they stumbled through the Ironclad's labyrinthine interior. Harper's flashlight illuminated a journal, left open on a captain's desk. The pages were brittle, but Kane managed to piece together fragments of the Ravager's story. The ship had been part of a naval fleet in 1887, tasked with transporting a mysterious artifact recovered from an uncharted island. The artifact was described as a black obelisk pulsating with unnatural energy. The crew's descent into madness was meticulously detailed: hallucinations, violent outbursts, and finally, mass disappearances. The artifact was cursed, Kane whispered, and they brought it aboard. As if on cue, the whispers returned, now accompanied by shadowy figures darting just beyond the edges of their vision. Riggs screamed as one of the figures lunged, dragging him into the darkness. The others fled, stumbling into a cavernous cargo hold. There, bathed in an eerie green light, stood the obelisk. It was unlike anything they had ever seen, its surface shifting as if alive. Harper reached out, transfixed, but Kane yanked him back. "Don't touch it," he shouted. But it was too late. The obelisk's glow intensified, and the ship seemed to come alive. Metal groaned as walls twisted and warped, trapping the crew. Harper's eyes glazed over, and he began muttering incoherently, speaking in a language no one recognized. The shadows grew bolder, their forms more defined, emaciated sailors with hollow eyes and mouths frozen in silent screams. Kane and the remaining crew fought their way back to the deck, only to find the lifeboat destroyed. The Persephone was nowhere in sight, swallowed by the unnatural fog. Desperation turned to terror as Harper's body convulsed. His head snapped back, and a guttural voice emanated from his throat. "You cannot leave," it growled. "The Ravager claims all who board her." Harper collapsed, lifeless. The others stared in horror as his body began to dissolve into black mist, which coiled and seeped into the obelisk. "We're not making it off this ship," whispered crewman Daniels. "Not if we let it win," Kane replied, determination hardening his features. Kane devised a desperate plan: destroy the obelisk. He reasoned that its destruction might break the ship's curse. Armed with what little they had, they made their way back to the cargo hold, fighting off shadowy entities that clawed and shrieked. Daniels was the next to fall, dragged into the darkness despite Kane's efforts to save him. By the time Kane reached the obelisk, he was alone. He rigged an improvised explosive from supplies found in the Ravager's armory, setting a timer and stepping back. The obelisk's surface rippled, and faces emerged, the faces of his lost crew, begging him to stop. Kane hesitated, guilt racking him, but he steeled himself. "You took them. You won't take me." The explosion rocked the ship, and the obelisk shattered. The shadows screamed, disintegrating into nothingness. The fog lifted, revealing the Persephone in the distance. Kane, battered and alone, leaped into the freezing water, swimming toward salvation. Kane was found days later, clinging to a piece of driftwood, rescued by a passing vessel. He recounted his tale to disbelieving ears. The Ravager was never found, nor was any trace of his crew. Years later, Fishermen reported seeing a ghostly ironclad drifting in the North Atlantic, vanishing as quickly as it appeared. Those who ventured too close claimed to hear whispers, and the mournful cries of a lone survivor, forever haunted by the Ravager's curse. Story 3: The Phantom of the Crimson Horizon. The sea was a black mirror that night, reflecting only the pinprick stars above. Captain Elias Mercer stood on the bridge of the Vanguard horizon, staring out into the infinite abyss. The cargo freighter was halfway through its route across the Atlantic when the distress signal crackled over the radio, a faint, desperate call. "Mayday, Mayday, this is the Crimson Tide, coordinates 37.2 north, 45.7 west, engines failing, crew ill, need immediate assistance." The transmission was weak, almost swallowed by static. But the desperation in the voice was unmistakable. The Crimson Tide? Elias' brow furrowed. That ship had vanished over 50 years ago, its disappearance a legend among sailors. First Officer Ramirez entered the bridge, his expression grim. "Captain, should we respond?" Elias hesitated. Maritime law demanded they investigate. But the idea of chasing ghosts sent a chill through him. Finally, he nodded. "Set a course for the coordinates. Inform the crew." As the ship altered its trajectory, a cold wind swept across the deck. The stars seemed to dim, swallowed by a creeping fog that rolled in unnaturally fast. The Vanguard horizon pushed forward, its massive hull cutting through the mist like a blade. Hours passed before they spotted it. Through the shroud of fog, a silhouette emerged, a massive vessel, its structure eerily intact despite its age. The Crimson Tide loomed in the water, its hull encrusted with barnacles and streaked with rust. Its windows were dark, lifeless. "No lights," Ramirez muttered. "No sign of power." Elias grabbed the radio. "This is Captain Mercer of the Vanguard horizon. We received your distress call. Do you require assistance?" Silence. "Launch the search party," Elias ordered. "Prepare the lifeboats." A team of 6, armed with flashlights and radios, boarded the Crimson Tide. Elias monitored their progress from the bridge, his stomach tightening with every passing minute. "Captain," one of the crew members' voices crackled over the radio. "The ship is empty. No crew. No signs of life." Another voice cut in, trembling. "You need to see the engine room. Something's not right here." Elias joined the search team, stepping onto the deck of the Crimson Tide. The air was heavy with decay, the smell of salt and rot invading his senses. Inside, the corridors were coated in a strange, black mold that pulsed faintly, as if alive. The engine room was worse. Machinery that should have rusted to uselessness gleamed with an unnatural sheen. Symbols were etched into the walls, arcane and incomprehensible. In the center of the room lay a journal, its leather cover warped and brittle. Elias picked it up, flipping through its water-damaged pages. The last entries were frantic, scrawled in shaky handwriting. "We shouldn't have taken the idol. It whispers, promises power, but it's a lie. The crew is sick. They're changing. It's too late. We're cursed. The ship won't let us go." Elias looked up. The air in the room felt thicker, the walls seeming to close in. Ramirez tapped his shoulder, pointing to a corner. Something moved, a shadow detached itself from the darkness, shifting unnaturally. It had no discernible form, only an overwhelming sense of malice. We need to leave, Elias whispered. Now. The team hurried back to the lifeboat. But the crimson tide wasn't done with them. As they pushed off, the fog thickened, swirling like a living thing. The water around the Vanguard horizon began to churn, waves crashing against its sides. "Captain," a crewman shouted. "Look!" The crimson tide was transforming. Its structure twisted, metal groaning as it reshaped itself into something monstrous. The barnacles covering its hull glowed faintly, their light pulsing in rhythm with an otherworldly hum. Shadows writhed across the deck, forming grotesque shapes that stared with eyeless faces. A deafening screech tore through the air. Elias clutched his ears, the sound reverberating through his skull. The shadows were moving toward the Vanguard horizon, crossing the water as if it were solid ground. Full speed ahead, Elias bellowed. The engines roared to life, the ship lurching forward. But the shadows were relentless, their tendrils snaking up the hull. Crew members screamed as the darkness engulfed them, their bodies dissolving into nothingness. Elias knew they couldn't outrun it. Desperation clawed at him as he raced to the engine room. There, he found the ship's emergency flares. "If we can't escape," he muttered, "we'll fight." The crew rallied, firing flares into the advancing shadows. The light seemed to repel them, the tendrils retreating with every burst. But it wasn't enough. The crimson tide loomed closer, its grotesque form towering over the freighter. Elias grabbed the ship's radio, broadcasting one final message: "Mayday, this is the Vanguard horizon. If anyone hears this, stay away from these coordinates. The crimson tide is..." The shadows surged forward, swallowing the ship whole. The radio cut to static. Weeks later, a fishing vessel picked up a faint transmission. "Mayday, Mayday, this is the Vanguard horizon, coordinates 37.2 north. 45.7 west, engines failing, crew ill, need immediate assistance." The captain of the fishing boat hesitated, staring at the fog rolling in. "Turn us around," he ordered. "We're not going anywhere near that." The sea swallowed the signal once more, leaving only silence.